I've already mentioned that he was the co-founder and CEO of EdgeConneX. He founded that in 2010. He is also a general partner of TDF Ventures with over $150 million under management prior to EdgeConneX. He led the Wade Capital Group, a company sponsored by a large private equity firm focused on consolidation and growth in the telecommunications marketplace. Randy has served as CTO, COO, and CEO at several successful public and private entities, including BSG Clearinghouse, Telespark, Wireless World Solutions, and Iridium, where he led a successful $5.3 billion reorganization of the company. Randy also worked with Nextel to start and serve as the CEO of Nextel Ventures. He began his career at Bellcore, progressing from a number of management roles, culminating in his position as Executive Director of Network Operations Systems. I told you he got his MS degree in electrical engineering from Stanford and his BS in computer engineering from the U of M. He was also an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award winner in 2014 based on his spectacular success at EdgeConneX. Let's give a warm homecoming U of M welcome to Randy Brouckman.
Thank you.
Batter up.
Yeah, thank you. I hear that bio and I realize how lucky and fortunate I am. And before you all take too seriously anything I'm going to say today, the guy on stage is that guy at University of Michigan senior year, full of bad ideas. This one happened to be a beach party in my apartment, that's sand in my kitchen, and I thought it would be cool to bring an inflatable pool into the living room. The pool lasted 15 minutes. I hope nobody here lives in the Viscount apartments because that was where we were. It was a really bad idea. The police reminded me of that at about 2 in the morning, what a bad idea it was. And just to prove that entrepreneurs can have a lot of good or bad ideas and learn from each one, while I was pretty cool with the beach party, we decided to throw a nerd party senior year for the engineer friends we had. The party was non-alcoholic, as you can see by the drink. It started at 8 p.m. and had to end promptly at 11 p.m. Now, the foolishness of this was, well, in many ways, you can see what we did, but we actually let people take pictures at the end of the day, was probably the biggest mistake we made. But not to be outdone, some ideas went from really bad and did get better. So after 11, we kicked everybody out of the apartment, and at midnight, we started the metal party. And this too is me senior year at the University of Michigan. So I guess at the end of this, if nothing else you take from me today, know that no matter how goofy your ideas may be, how unconfident you may be, if that ding-dong can survive in the real world, there's a darn good chance you are going to do a lot better. Because somehow or other I recovered from these kind of ideas and made it. Which leads me to now the serious part of this discussion. Going to talk a little today about a number of things, but I think we're going to dig in on some of my experiences, and I only have an hour, so I don't get to talk about too many things. But we'll start off with we'll call it a tale of two companies. I think that's probably characterized it. So right now, I need all of you to be senior associates at a venture capital firm. Seems like a pretty good gig. If you can get it coming out of school, it's a great gig. But you guys are all senior associates right now at a venture capital firm. I'm going to give you 2 company readouts. You're going to decide which company you're going to invest in. We're going to invest in an infrastructure space. So company 1, it's called the year about 2010-ish. Company 1 that we're looking at, and we're doing our deal flow meeting, is an infrastructure company. It's got a vision that there's going to be an explosion of content on the internet driven largely by video services, just an explosion of the amount of video that will be consumed. As a result of this explosion of video, we're going to need to bring fiber closer to the consumers. And to do that, we will put small co-location boxes out at cell sites, and we'll bring fiber there, and we'll be able to make wireless go faster. And eventually, we'll bring the content all the way there. From a business model perspective, it's going to be a recurring, it's going to be business to business. So our business will sell to other businesses. And it's going to be a long-term recurring revenue model. Okay, that's pretty good. Now this company fast forwards a little bit, and it comes forward and it wins its first deal in the first 6 months, check, success. And it gets to about year 3, and it's got $30 million of sales, and it's profitable. Now, many of you have not seen startup companies, but I can assure you, if you get a startup company from 0 to 30 million, there's a lot of people that think that's a huge success in startup world. This company is at $30 million of revenue, not recurring. Cheese got moved on it. This idea of bringing fiber to the cell sites got blown up because Verizon Wireless changed the way things were going to happen. So this company adjusted a little bit and came up with a way to get fiber there around Verizon, and brought fiber to office buildings and so on. It's got 30 million, it's got a pipeline to get it to 60 million, and the management team is relatively convinced that it can get to $100 million of revenue and continue to be profitable, call it 20% plus or minus margin on that money. Takes about, I don't know, call it $20 million of investment to get there. So I gave you a pretty good roadmap. I gave you kind of where we had to start to make the decision. I even gave you what that's going to play out to be over the next 3 years. Park it. Company 2, we're only going to be able to invest in one of these. Company 2, call it 2012, has a great idea. There's going to be an explosion of video content on the internet. People are going to consume it everywhere, and we have to bring this content much closer to where it's being consumed. In order to do that, we have to build a whole new generation of data centers right next to these things called aggregation points, which is where your traffic gets routed, for those of you that are engineers in the room. And we will find a way to get all the biggest content players, Netflix and Google YouTube and Akamai with ESPN and HBO Go and MLB BAM and Facebook. And we're going to get everything to come right into the local markets across the United States and eventually across the world. We're going to invest a lot of capital to do this. We're going to do a recurring revenue model. It's going to be business to business. Boy, these are starting to sound a little similar, right? Bringing content closer. It's going to take $300 million of equity investment to pull off. But if it happens, this company, with just that $300 million, will have a recurring revenue stream of $150 million to $200 million a year at an 80% margin. So call it 150 to plus or minus profit, cash flow, profit that it's generating. So who wants to invest in company 1 and who wants to invest in company 2? Company 1. Okay, company 2.
Randy, what do we know about the founders of these two companies in terms of their skills or experience?
So the founders are all experienced operators. They've all been in infrastructure-based companies, very similar. The investors are identical for these two companies. So you're the follow-on investor. The investors, the A round was led by 2 VCs and a strategic for each one of them. In fact, the same 2 VCs and the same 2 strategic for each one. Everybody keep their vote the same? The good news is both are right.
Hang on one second, Randy. We got a question over here.
Go for it.
They take their votes very seriously.
Yes, I gather. I'm glad we didn't do it automated.
In the simulation, how experienced are we? Because if this is like my first deal, then one seems like it has less risk than
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a tough question. I made you a senior associate. Clearly, you're just an associate. So no, that's a great question. So how much money do I have to invest, right? I'm a venture capital firm. You talk to me about a $20 million investment horizon. I'm pretty comfortable with that. You talk to me about a $200 to $300 million investment horizon, and my head explodes, right? VCs can't do that. That's what private equity money is for. That's what sovereign wealth money is for. That's what big leverage is for. So from a deal perspective, both of these have no competitors. So it's a tricky one. There's no direct competitor to company A or to company B in this case. So from a deal flow, you've probably done 20 deals in your day. Your firm has, the partner that's leading it has probably done 20 deals. He or she has probably led 6 infrastructure deals. And that's kind of where you're sitting in the food chain. But you know that if you do deal 2, there's no way you're going to end up with a large ownership share at the end. If you do deal 1, you may or may not, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing as a VC. All right, so we had roughly a split. We didn't do a formal count. We had roughly a split. So what's interesting in this case is we're going to talk about the art of the pivot. It turns out they're the same company. They happen to be my company, which, as Tom said, we are fortunate and blessed to be in unicorn, elephant, all the rest of it. And like any unicorn, the last thing you want to do is actually go public at this stage. I've got 5 topics I thought about talking to you all on. And what we want to do today is talk about the art of the pivot. So let me carry forward why this one was so important. A company that ends up with a non-recurring revenue stream, don't get me wrong, $30 million is a great amount of money, and we were chugging out, call it $6 million of profit. We saw a pretty good path to 100. It was a non-recurring revenue stream, largely services-based, if you will. And the valuation on that was, right, it wasn't going to be anything, right, because it's just not valued highly. It's not predictable. It wasn't pay by the drink. It wasn't long-term predictable recurring cash flows. And I sat with my investors and I said, we're not going to make it. Now we've got enough cash that I think we can invest a little bit, but our customers are telling us our big idea is right. Content needs to move closer to the consumer. At the end of the day, it was that simple. For those of you that may remember, in 2010, 11, even up through 2012 and early 13, in many markets in the US, you couldn't stream HD video from Netflix. It was an SD experience. YouTube in Phoenix was SD for a long time. And it largely was driven, there was big blow-ups between Time Warner Cable and Netflix that made the press, and net neutrality rules and regulatory rules were flying everywhere. And Comcast came to me and said, this is a customer, a very large customer, came to me and said, let me tell you about this great new idea we have with Xfinity and record any show anywhere and play it back any place, anytime. And ultimately, we trialed it, says Comcast, but it blew up our network. We need to bring content closer to the consumer, just like you've been preaching, Randy, for the last 3 years. But we need it much bigger than you ever envisioned. And we need you to basically need you to invest $300 million over the next 24 months and try to build a whole new infrastructure to flatten out the internet and let us bring all of this content, make an on-ramp for Netflix, make an on-ramp for Google, make an on-ramp for these companies. Take the heart of what you've done, the concepts of what you've done, and go do it. And then one of my lessons here at the end is, and we won't do it today, the right investors at the right time. I was fortunate to have the right investors at the right time that said, okay, we can support you in that. We can support that pivot. And so we'll talk today about the art of the pivot. It was a company that was headed one way. It heard its customer, it listens to its customer, and it pivoted. And there's a lot of stories about pivot. Now, we did a pretty major pivot. We stayed kind of with the core theme, but we went from small co-location facilities at cell sites to building a next generation of data center. First in the United States, we actually built 23 data centers in 24 months that we build, own, and operate around the country. Brought local content peering into every market, including here in Michigan, where we moved. Netflix, Google, Akamai, Amazon, and Facebook, all resident with Comcast, so that if you have a Comcast subscription, you have a much higher speed experience, a much better user experience for content. And we made that pivot.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Fire away, Tom.
So just in the context of what you already told us, was the pivot driven primarily off of your fear of concern of how you were going to continue to exist in your model as it was at your $30 million revenue rate, or was it the big dream? So were you starstruck in terms of the higher end potential, or were you driven more out of fear of failing there or ambition for greatness?
The latter, not the former, right? I mean, we should all be so lucky as to fail with a $30 million startup, right? That had clear path to 60. It was absolutely the latter, not the former. It was a belief in the major theme that we had, and better yet, our customer confirmed it. It was a whole lot of iteration that had to occur, and I'm getting like 8 slides ahead here. A whole lot of iteration. Test your theme with your customer, pivot, adjust. Test your theme, pivot, adjust. Test your theme, pivot, adjust. And the customer came to me with a big need, aligned with our big idea, and we thought we could hit the cover off the ball, and we did it. Now, I'll tell you a little bit of strategy stuff. We did it in stealth mode. You'd be amazed how many people love to get on the highest hill and yell with the loudest voice about all the great ideas they have and the super things they're going to do. And sometimes in a business-to-consumer model, that's just exactly how you want to do it. Oftentimes in a business-to-business model, stealth mode is a great mode until you go capture market share. I had actually won 15 deals across the United States in, you'd probably think of them as football cities, where before any competitor realized what we had done. And by then we had so much wind in our sails, we were able to win 100% of Cox Communications markets, 90% of all Comcast markets, 75% of Time Warner and Charter's markets, and as a result, we had like 85+% of the United States market to let us go forward. Stealth can be an interesting thing. That's a separate subject. I'll come back some year on that one. Anyway, we're going to talk today a little bit about the art of the pivot and some of the interesting things you see with it. Pivots aren't always easy, depending on what seat you sit in. Here, I'd much prefer to be the woman than the man, right? I'm not leaving you, I'm just pivoting for another man. And that's often used. Depending on your perspective, pivots can be easy or hard. They can certainly be emotional. Think about it. You're a startup. You're the founder. You're the entrepreneur. You've had this idea. People gave you money for it. And son of a gun, it didn't work. It isn't quite right. It's maybe 10 degrees off. It's maybe 90 degrees off. Maybe it's just plain orthogonal. And it's important that you not drink your own Kool-Aid too much, that you're able to pivot, that you're listening to the signals from the marketplace, that you're open-minded about it, that you remain passionate but not blind. And that allows you to do it. And we'll talk about some processes for how you can do that here in just a moment.
Was there anyone you had to break up with on either your management team or your external relationships as part of that hardness of pivoting?
Absolutely, and it's hard. Sales team, first and foremost. We had geared a sales team for X. We needed to adjust and gear a sales team for Y. I had a big team working, making money. A team of folks delivering at 30 million of revenue run rate, delivering about $6-7 million of profit, almost $8 million of profit. They were really hitting it out of the park. And I knew that there was going to be a wind down. Very hard to do. Investor-wise, I had to look at those investors and say, you'll own a much smaller piece of a much bigger pie, but you all can't go to you all won't be able to carry this from where you're at to the end. We're going to have to bring in a different class of capital. We're going to have to take leverage risk. We're going to have to do some things that are going to be outside of your comfort zone. And I guess I'd say they trusted me. They trusted our team to be able to do that. They trusted the fact that we had put the feelers out there and we were listening effectively to our customers, and they supported it. I think the reason why was all along the way we were transparent. Nothing came as a surprise. There's a lot of folks that try to hold things in. Look, I know investors take good news well. right? I sit on a few boards. We love to hear good news. Happy ears, we're good at it. But what really makes an investor great is how they act when times are tougher. And in this case, I had three great investors, two venture capital firms and a strategic. Helped the strategic was Comcast, so Comcast was getting it on both sides. But that goes back to picking the right, if I go back a lesson or two, that goes back to the right investors at the right time. Another lesson we could do another day. So there are some great pivots out there. Mine is a good one. There are much more successful companies than the one I was just talking to you about. I don't know how many of you know this, but there was this company called Odeo that was podcast searching and subscription. That's where it started. Saw a change in the marketplace with this bloody thing called iTunes coming along. Thought that might saturate the podcast market. Took its core technology, brought the management team together. Thought about what they had, what worked, what didn't work, where's the future going, and literally pivoted the company to microblogging. 140 characters at a time, pivots, and obviously becomes Twitter today. That gets to one of the other things. I had a great question yesterday when I was talking to a small group of the ELP students. Somebody said, as an investor, what's most important to you? And period, bar none, people. Great people and an average product and an average idea will find ways to become great. Bad team, great product will inevitably fail. And that was a great set of folks that listened to the marketplace, anticipated, were forward thinking, didn't fall in love too much with their own idea, didn't drink their own Kool-Aid, pulled off a great pivot. Next one's kind of interesting. I won't show it here. This company started as a fundraising company for social good, kind of around the tipping point concept. Get enough people interested in a particular small social issue, raise money to solve it, and boom, you fund this social good effort. Anybody know the company it may have pivoted to? It was called, I won't tell you because that gives away. Anybody know what it may have pivoted to? That's the point pivoting to Groupon. Now, they used the tipping point concept, the tipping point algorithms.
They went from social good to deals that are no good?
Yeah, to the tipping point. Now, there are companies that need to continue to pivot. And this might be one, as they've obviously run into some headwinds. Well, look, let's not kid ourselves. We've all had IPOs go, and they go up, and they go down, and certain things happen. And I actually think they forgot some of the cardinal rules, which is, when you're successful and you come out of stealth mode, competitors show up, new technologies show up. You've got to continue to reinvent yourself. You've got to become your biggest competitor. Your biggest threat to a successor needs to be yourself from the inside. I think they actually lost some of the sight of that. Still a great company at the end of the day. But took that core tipping point concept and said, okay, now if we get enough local deals, enough excitement about the local deals, or local opportunity, we can create the local deals and the couponing that is. This next one's kind of interesting. Bourbon. Best described as Foursquare meets Mafia Wars. Is probably the best way to describe bourbon. And it had this little capability when you checked in, you could actually do some photo sharing as you were working your way through this game. And you had the ability to kind of project yourself in the game, and they did some photo sharing in it. And they started to talk to customers. They got up to 25,000 users, I think. They got up to about 25,000 users on Bourbon. Got some money raised. It was about $2 million or so. $1 million, $2 million. Founder and a co-founder. We're trying to figure out what people liked, why it slowed down, what did people use. And it was interesting. They got to talking about everybody was using the picture capability and putting pictures in there. And the founder actually stepped away, was burnt out, stepped away, went on a vacation with his wife down in Mexico. And she was saying, I'd love to do it, but I hate to share my pictures because, I'm not that great of a photographer compared to Ken. So what do I do here? And they talked about filters and so on and some of the technology they had developed there. Pivoted and course, we all know Instagram is the success it is.
How long did it live as bourbon before it became Instagram?
I would say it lived as bourbon 1 to 2 years, post-funding, sub a year, and pivoted. Sub a year, and pivoted. Made all the mistakes of scaling, all the rest of it that happened when it became Instagram, but that's for yet another story.
You pivoted in success, but this is probably an example of something that was pivoting out of either stagnation or potential failure. In your experience, what is the ratio of those that pivot aggressively while they're on the muscle and those that do it as a Hail Mary? Many of the Hail Marys pivot too late. You can't pivot when you're out of money. So you can't pivot when you're out of money. I'm going to give you a simple phrase. Fail fast, pivot faster. Right? If you take something else away from this talk, besides that goofball who actually is okay in the real world, take away the fact if you're going to fail fast, pivot faster. Pivot when you have money. And so I think, Tom, where you see the real Hail Marys is at the 11th hour and they get there. I think the best pivots were structured pivots. These guys actually saw the plateau and didn't think it was, hey, these users just don't get it, we're going to make the game better. They went back to the core why and they talked to the subscribers. They actually reached out in a blogging exercise to figure out why things were happening. So I think the best successes, you don't tend to see them go into, they don't have to rise up from the phoenix, from the ashes. But you see a lot of Hail Marys. Yeah, no, and that's the point I wanted to draw out, is that a lot of people think that that is the point that you pivot when you're out of money, and you've clarified that, which is by then it's too late.
Oh, yeah. That's called resurrection, not pivoting. And you hope you didn't tick off too many people along the way. And look, I've had plenty of companies that have failed. In the bio, Tom read, he quickly went through the fact that you're looking at the guy who had to deal with, at the time, the nation's largest bankruptcy at Iridium. So I had 66 satellites plus 72 satellites in space, and nobody used them. And so, oh boy, I got my stint as a rocket scientist came to a quick end, and I had to quickly become a businessman and figure out how to get that thing out of bankruptcy. Hey, sticking to the game theme, this next one started, I'll actually give you another hint. I'll stick with a game and the picture theme. This next one started with a psychology major, a psychology degree, and had this concept of game never ending, kind of an infinity game. No winner, no loser, no ending, kind of a life game. Also had an interesting characteristic with it in that it had an ability to check in your photos and share them with the folks with whom you were playing the game. Anybody know what that company became? Flickr. You got it, Flickr. Game never ending becomes Flickr. Now, this is a great story because they got closer to the end and yet pulled it out. With the same core team, did have to go back to the well for funding. So it's one of the rare ones that had to do that. Obviously a huge success with Flickr. Stewart went back on to do another one. Went right back to the gaming world, by the way, post-Flickr, after he punched out. Went back to the gaming, punched out of Yahoo, obviously I can understand punching out of Yahoo. Goes back, gets back into the gaming world. He just won't give up this psychology degree in the infinity game concept. Ends up starting another company, I don't even have a slide for it, that has a little chat room capability in it. Wait for it, Slack. That's a twofer. If you ever get him to speak, you'll learn a lot more than you're going to learn from me. Hey, the next company's kind of an interesting one. Pinterest. Pinterest started as an e-commerce shopping company. And here's a good story. Here's one where they looked and listened carefully. You checked in, and what you did was you said, tell me when the thing I'm interested in goes on sale. And when it went on sale, you'd get an alert, and then you'd be able to go buy it. Now, it wasn't a smooth transition from alert to purchase and single click and all the rest of it. But what they found was their customer segment was primarily targeting collectibles. knickknacks, antiques, the things they were collecting, their hobbies almost in some ways. And as they dug into that, it became kind of interesting. You can see that little pivot, take the technology, right segment, maybe the wrong value proposition to that segment. And sure enough, becomes Pinterest. The team executed, just outstanding. I love this next one.
I'm going to stop you and ask you another question.
Fire
So, as a follow-on to your Slack example, are you more inclined to invest in someone who has already executed on a successful idea? I mean, are you there are people that say serial entrepreneur, and some people think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or it's like saying I'm a consultant, but it really means I don't have a job. So, what is your attitude in terms of, wow, he did something incredible, and so therefore I believe that his next idea will also be incredible?
So look, I think you probably get an unfair seat at the table, right? You get a second audience. It's kind of like if you're an alumni, your kid's application gets 2 readings from the university when you go to get in.
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Right. I don't know if that's true either, but I'd like to believe it. So you get, your kid's college app gets 2 readings. I think that same thing kind of applies here. I'll tell you, Tom, though, what I care more about. We have funded teams that have come from medium to big corporations that had a track record, that carved something out, that hadn't done the serial thing. I worry about the 8-time serial guy and always sells early. So I watch out for that one a little bit. And that's okay, because sometimes you just got to figure out, hey, is this really a product? Is this a feature? Or is this really a company? And sometimes there's guys that are serial entrepreneurs. You tend to find their product serial entrepreneurs more than their company serial entrepreneurs. But I'll tell you what we really look for is we try to make sure we don't end up funding teams with a single founder. You want a balanced view around the room. Single founders tend to find founderitis a lot of times. And founderitis is sometimes, it causes a lot of blind spots, let's put it that way. Founders don't tend to pivot quickly sometimes.
And there was a co-founder for EdgeConneX,
There
correct?
certainly was, Edmund Wilson. Not only a co-founder, but is probably one of my closest friends now. We didn't
Well,
start
talk to me about that, how that relationship started, and how you knew you were going to gel, or that your skills and attributes were going to be
Yep,
complementary.
that is a great question, and if Edmund were here, he deserves all the credit. And actually, I think Tom looked at this, when I was humbly awarded the Entrepreneur of the Year award, I actually said I don't deserve this. Edmund does. I met Edmund in 2009. He came to my office at the time. I'd started Wade Capital Group. Its private equity money, was investing personal money as well. Edmund came to me through a mutual friend to help him with this idea of EdgeConneX. And I liked it in principle. I really liked Edmund. We needed to work on the business model a little bit. We needed to work on the investment thesis, all the rest of it. Edmund was able to demonstrate he clearly understood the business. He is a brilliant guy. He'd never run a company. He was a consultant, if you will. He'd spent his whole year as consultant. So I guess in the been there, done that, not so much. Seen that, talked about that a whole lot. So we got to gelling, and I actually agreed to seed fund EdgeConneX on a personal level. At the time, though, I was a partner at TDF, and I said, look, you don't front run your partners. That is a great way to get kicked out of a partnership.
Explain what front running your partners means.
So Edmund came to me as CEO and founder of Wade Capital Group, which was doing some roll-ups and had some personal money to be invested, and I could have taken the seed round. In fact, I committed a fair amount to do the seed round to Edmund. Said, but before I do that, I want you to meet with the TDF fund, the partnership at the TDF fund. Because if they're interested, the fund comes first, not me. And they met with TDF, who ultimately led the A round. And they liked it, and they said to Edmund, talk to me about scaling a company, talk to me about running sales and so on. He goes, I'm not going to run sales. I'm this massive introvert. I want to kind of work on the operations and the build. And they go, well, who are you thinking is going to step in, and do you want to run it? He goes, No, I don't have to run it. Who do you want to run it? And he actually said, I've been working with Randy on some ideas, and so we started to spend more time together. We spent about 4 months together, perfecting it, living off my credit card, actually, for a while, where we did the first couple of customer implementations. And Edmund came to me and said, hey, let's do this as a partnership. I want you to lead it, da-da-da. And so we got going there. And it was good. I think we had the motivator, we had the cynic, we had the executor, and we sort of had that team come together. So it's a great story. We see a lot of teams like that with a couple of folks tend to be, frankly, it's in the case where 1 and 1 is greater than 2, usually when you have a couple of good founders in the room. Our biggest return at TDF as a fund was a company we sold recently for $1.2 billion called Virtue Stream. 2 really strong people out of industry had been some Accenture consultants along their way. 2 really strong people out of industry. The rah-rah motivator and the detailed-oriented executor. And they took it from a paltry $40 million investment to $1.2 billion out the door, which is just, I think speaks very similar to those types of stories. Next company does some interesting things. 1971, sold espresso machines and coffee beans. Went to Italy and decided it needed to make that flavor available on every corner here across the world, ultimately. Howard turns that company, becomes, well, what we know I call today Java addiction, right? Starbucks. Interesting pivot, not far off of where it was. Understood you could, make a little bit more doing the latter than the former, and that there was a real market there. Actually got the real idea to do the pivot post his visits to Italy. Post his pivots to Italy. This last company, which I won't put the slide up, built an operating system for digital cameras. Go back to early smartphone days, probably be the way to think of it. Digital cameras, you guys are taking all those little pictures. This was big because the pictures you saw earlier were film. Then we went to these digital cameras. They were doing an operating system for digital cameras. Their big vision was be a unified platform. That way you can start to put lots of apps in these cameras, or lots of software can tie in. In particular, their first thing was going to be take pictures, upload them to this novel concept called the cloud, and be able to store them in massive storage. That was the idea that this company had. It pivoted. Does anybody know that company? Yeah. Close. Keep going. Android. The company pivoted, saw a big technology change in the smartphone, said, what is the camera? Where is the camera? How are people going to do the camera? Now remember, we talked about Instagram going on and filters being applied and some other interesting things. What a bloody brilliant pivot. And of course, obviously, bought by Google and is today the largest operating system on smartphones in the world. I gave up here, but there's a lot of fun pivots we didn't talk about. Hewlett-Packard, from testing machines to what Hewlett-Packard was, needs to be, and probably pivot 3 more times. Nintendo, from playing cards to what you know today. I think one of my favorite ones is YouTube. Anybody know how YouTube started? This is a really bad idea. It was a video, it's kind of Tinder in video, as kind of the description. Really, like what could possibly go wrong, huh? It was video, make your own video, put it up for dating site. Quickly found, took the core technology of user-generated content, thank God opened it up to anything but dating, and created quite a spectacular company. Obviously, another Google exit. Justin TV to Twitch. There's a lot of interesting examples to that. So let's take a moment and say this isn't just art. There's a little bit of science to it. There's a little bit of math of management discipline one can apply. I think somebody who does the best job of this is Eric Ries in his book, The Lean Startup. Look, like any management book, you can read the first 10 pages and you largely get the next 200 to explain what the first 10
Don't tell them that. They're reading a book this semester.
And some of it is very easy to say in a book. It's a little theoretical. But Eric does a darn good job. He hits most of it, and if you step back and don't try to overanalyze it, I think he nails it. Where he really gets it is this learning process that you have to have at the front end of a company. Customer discovery, validate. Customer discovery, validate, pivot, adjust, pivot. Now I gave you some examples of monster pivots, big company pivots, Bourbon moving over to Instagram. But pivots occur on a number of other levels, What did Churchill say? Something along the lines of, right? To change is good, right? To change often is to be perfect, or something like that, is kind of what Winston Churchill said. I think what Eric does here is a good process. What he talks about is the importance of measures. At some point when you're validating, figure out what success looks like. What's the measure you want? What's the feedback you want? Adjust, go forward, adjust, go forward. Now don't get stuck in a do loop. You'll burn up your money. Fire away, 5 minutes. Don't get stuck in a do loop. I talked about pivots. So for those of you that are in the Ross School, I know Osterwalder's canvas is supposed to be all filled out with key partners, activities, and everything else. I have done 4 startups, now 5 as an entrepreneur. I've invested in about 30 companies over the course of my life. I bought 10 or 15. Let me tell you what a startup's business canvas really looks like. That's it. Now, you don't actually get to go to the VC with that, but between you, me, and a lamppost, we all know that's really what it is. If it's a new idea, if it's a fresh idea, if it's a fresh market. Sometimes being a fast follower, doing something better with a newer technology, you can fill in some of that. But don't kid yourself, that's what it is. And so a pivot isn't just a massive change. Sometimes it's a change in any one of these 9 quadrants of Osterwalder's canvas. Segment, value proposition, etc. So it's a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the business, the product, the model for growth, I'd say the value proposition as well. Change ahead. I can guarantee you there are very few startups where the slides you put together at your VC pitch and the exit look at that's a straight line from A to Z. Sometimes it's quite dramatic. Sometimes it's just a little squiggle along the way. In almost all cases, though, I guarantee you'll be using the Braille method, feeling your way through it. Probably 10 types to think about. We've covered most of these. Zoom in. Hey, we do photo sharing, right? Zoom out. We do YouTube, you could say, maybe as a zoom out to be a much bigger instrument. The customer need. We thought they needed this, they needed that. I'm probably a good example of that one. Customer segment. We thought we were targeting A, but it turns out B. We wanted to do shopping. Hey, it turns out we've got this interesting Pinterest thing and a targeted segment. The platform, is it a company, is it a platform, is it a product? Important one, B2B, B2C. I yesterday got to speak to a gentleman at ZenDrive. B2C maybe needs to pivot B2B in order to get to scale. A lot of interesting examples of things like that. Value capture. Figured you guys get a kick out of the emoji. How am I going to get it? Freemium, pay, subscription, all the various models to realize and capture the value. What's the real engine of growth? How do I go to market? And is this a technology play? Is it a better technology? Is there emerging better technology? Can I use technology to solve a problem today in a better way? A bunch of pivots can occur. A lot of companies lose sight of that last pivot. They tend to be partially successful. They don't realize the change in technology. They quickly become antiquated. So how do you do it? I think I'll end it with 2 more slides. So that same guy you saw on the first few slides, this is him about 5 years later. When you go to pivot, you pivot. You jump in, you do it. As you can see, 5 years after leaving Michigan, I still was full of bad ideas, jumping out of a hot air balloon in this case. At least there was a cord attached. But I think what you got to do is you can't tiptoe around a pivot. Oh, have I seen so many failed pivots. Let's dip our toe. Let's still do the old thing, maybe the new thing. Oh, maybe this one. How do you manage a staff of people? You're either in or you're out. So, understand why you need to pivot. Communicate to your team why you need to pivot. Communicate to your investors why you need to pivot. Measure what you expect to achieve by when you pivot. And quite frankly, this will end all things. Just rip it off and do it. And while that idea may be over, the new one may be beginning. And the good news is my speech is over. That's all I had.
Thank you, Randy. Very quickly, by the time people get to the main stage they're usually successful, as you have been. Can you think of a time in your journey when you faced significant adversity and a specific example and how that changed you or informed you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think of I think of a day at Iridium. At the time I was the head of all software, the chief information officer, and I guess head of business operations at that point in time. And the company launched. We'd put $5.3 billion into space. And I built a dashboard to look at the results. And we launched this thing, and there were no phone calls coming. There was not a single phone call coming. And I had moved my family. I had lost sight of work-life balance in doing it. I had become one of the public faces of this grand technology. And you know what we did is we dropped back 5. We realized the wrong segment had been targeted with the wrong value proposition, with the wrong way to capture the customer. And the good news was I was able to communicate that to the board. I'd been communicating that. I was able to communicate that with the board, power through. And that actually was probably the job that changed me. I heretofore had been kind of a leader of technical teams, but I'd never really been in, like I didn't get the finance side of the house, I didn't get the legal side of the house. It was kind of the opportunity that changed my career. While that one is less than a stellar outcome at Iridium, on a personal level, it allowed me to grow and learn and overcome. If you can overcome $5.3 billion of adversity, you can overcome a lot of adversity out there.
Perfect. That's the answer I wanted to go out on. All right, everybody have a great weekend. Thank you very much to Randy.
He's a pretty successful guy, right? He's an entrepreneur. He started dozens of companies. He started 9 companies that have over $1 billion valuation. I think he's earned a chance to go to space. He went out looking for someone to sell him a ticket in the 1990s, and he discovered, at least back then, there wasn't anyone. So he went out looking for a technology that could carry